Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hear me out. This is a fitting conversation today that I'm having with the executive director of the Coalition for Good Governance, Marilyn Marks, who has joined this show a few times before. It's always an enlightening conversation. And today will be one that's not even a binary left v right, RVD, blue v red sort of conversation. But I think it's a fitting conversation because on the day that Jimmy Carter leaves Atlanta, his remains, heading to the nation's capital where they will lie in repose before coming back to Plains, Georgia, Jimmy Carter's on our mind a little bit because Jimmy Carter was someone who had election integrity on his mind almost from day one. My apologies. Let me introduce you. Marilyn Marks, thanks for joining the show. I appreciate it. How are you? How are your holidays?
Great, and no apologies necessary. I'm always thrilled to talk to you anytime.
The passing of Jimmy Carter has given us all an opportunity to sort of learn about his era of politics, whether it be at the state level or as President of the United States. And a little known story about Jimmy Carter has to do with what is in your wheelhouse, election integrity. You want to share that story with us?
In 1962, in his very first run for office, he was running for state senator down in Plains in the neighboring counties. Well, it was the Democratic primary for state senate. You can imagine he was not a longtime party guy, but the party boss down there stuffed the ballot box against him. The party boss down there stuffed the ballot box for Carter's opponent and was doing it just blatantly. And apparently Carter was ahead in most of the counties in the polling. And then he gets a call from Roseland saying, hey, I'm hearing problems over here in, I've forgotten what the county's name is. There's problems over here. You need to get over there. Apparently that party boss was so blatant and so powerful that he was literally stuffing the ballot box in front of people. And apparently Carter went over there and saw him pulling ballots out of the ballot box, confronted him, but didn't end up changing his ways. And then that guy ultimately stuffed enough ballots in the box so that the opponent won. In the process, in order to make the books ballots, apparently the party boss listed names of dead people and people who had moved out of state in alphabetical order on the poll book. In other words, dead people had come in and they were so well organized. They came in alphabetical order.
How kind of them to do so.
Right. Anyway, so Carter, despite the views of his party saying, sit down and just wait your turn and don't challenge the election. Don't make a fuss of this. No, Carter wasn't having it. And he got the AJC involved. He got King and Spalding involved. He went to great lengths, to everyone's surprise, to fight this corruption. And apparently, either leading up to the court date or during the trial, the ballots that had been taken out of the ballot box and apparently records of what the guy had done were found under the bed of the party boss's daughter.
My gosh.
A kid. He hid the evidence under the kid's bed. Apparently, the judge made an instant decision. And as I understand it, and this is just wild to think about these days, the judge declared an election for the next day. It wasn't like, 45 days later, 60 days later, like they do now. I believe, as I understand it, that they, I guess you could get out the word that fast. And there's 7 counties or however many counties he was representing. And Carter won the election, and he was not opposed and in the general. And that began his first public service in the elected office arena.
What a wonderful story. The more I learn about Jimmy Carter and the love affair he and Roseland had over the years and his history, in the military, it's kind of sad that on this occasion, upon his passing, that we are learning so many generations of us who were not alive then anyway, are learning all of these stories about Jimmy and I don't know. I know. I come away thinking this could make like a series because there's so many pivots and turns.
Series.
Yeah, my goodness.
A series. You're absolutely right. Have you watched the documentary, The Rock and Roll President?
Yes.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it's another little cool point to Jimmy Carter. You don't think of Jimmy Carter as being cool, but Jimmy Carter was Jimmy Carter was a little gangster back, in that day when it comes to being a rock and roll guy,
Absolutely. And hanging out with Willie Nelson. Oh
Right?
my gosh.
Oh, we'd still like to hang out with Willie Nelson.
Absolutely. That has been my goal my entire life, to be a Willie Nelson roadie. And I haven't made it yet. But no, I think you're right. Another chapter that needs to be written that's not being talked about right now, and the business community should be talking about it, is, and you're too young to know about this, but Jimmy Carter led one of the most important economic changes this country's ever seen, and that is to push deregulation of airlines and trucking. Airline rates for that, seats for consumers, as well as trucking rates, were all highly regulated. And he helped bust that up and sent airlines into free markets and trucking into free markets. And the trucking industry in those days was furious with Jimmy Carter because, they had everything all set, right? They had regulated rates, wasn't any real competition. This led to major overhaul in the trucking industry, and the rates for transportation came down remarkably over the years.
How about that?
And in fact, those trucking companies that were ready for competition, they did extremely well. And I knew lots of I used to build truck trailers in those days. And I knew lots of trucking executives who hated Jimmy Carter at first, who then said, absolutely, I became wealthy because of Jimmy Carter. He let me compete. And you and I don't know, we don't really understand because we haven't lived it. A gallon of milk would cost a whole lot more if it had to be transported today under regulated tariffs. So,
how about that?
And I think that's a chapter people don't know about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I know he was fighting inflation, peskily during his presidency, and that's sort of the knock on his presidency. The fact that he couldn't really corral inflation, but he was actually working to do that, and policies like that don't see the light of day on store shelves and at the checkout line, oftentimes for months to years. So
years, yes, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I wanted to have a discussion with you today. There's an AJC article that came out, front page. It looks like the Georgia GOP is just not satisfied with some of the changes that they did make prior to the 2024 election. And of course, they're not happy with the fact that they tried to ram some policies through the unelected state elections board at the last minute. Mark Neese reporting filing the article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They're looking for more overhauls even after Trump won the 2024 election.
Well, your audience may disagree with me, but while I disagree with some of the things that they are proposing, they are absolutely right. We need an overhaul. We need an overhaul. We need a young Jimmy Carter who is committed to transparent, publicly overseeing elections, because everything that Georgia's elections have become is exactly what Jimmy Carter preached against and taught in the Carter Center other nations to embrace: real democratic elections, really democratic standards. And almost every single key standard that he taught, that Georgia has departed from. So the Republicans are right. There is a lot of overhaul that needs to be done.
See, this is a binary situation that, we are in a binary environment where this situation doesn't have binary solutions. And I think that once we detach ourselves from our partisanship, we can find some common ground. The paper ballots, the hand-marked paper ballot thing, that is something that Republicans, conservative activists anyway, are pushing for, that I think we could find some common ground on.
Yes.
Privacy concerns, which we'll touch on a little bit later in our conversation. That's something I think we could find some common ground on.
Yes.
So again, it doesn't really fit in the binary environment that we live in politically.
But I am just a terminal optimist, and I think maybe there is an environment here for the next several months, and let's hope as the legislature is meeting Nobody's screaming about the 2024 election getting the wrong outcome.
Right, of course
But
not.
many of us will scream to high heaven about how bad the processes are.
Mm-hmm.
And what we really want to overhaul are the processes without having to talk about, did Trump really win? Did Biden really win? Let's talk about, we can end up having an uncontroversial outcome and still have really bad processes, right? And we've got, now's the time to fix the processes. And that really ought to be done, as you say, on a multi-partisan basis.
Well,
if the legislature will listen, excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that I found myself sort of struck yesterday as I was watching, the events of January 6th, 2024 anyway, how, Speaker Mike Johnson spoke about how, there were no votes to object to the certification of the Republican victory. Everything was handled like adults would normally handle. When we saw how the results of the election turned out, there were no objections. There were, no kicking and screaming. Obviously, no insurrectionists. And maybe the weather had something to do. No, obviously there was no insurrectionists because we took our loss like adults did, and we didn't see that in 2020. And we've had some hand-wringing over midterm results, and even on the Democratic side, I know Stacey Abrams had some objections to the way the 2018 race went.
Yes,
but it's not as if, as we're saying, this is a binary environment. But what we have is a complicated problem in the state of Georgia that doesn't really fit in a binary situation as far as solutions go. And I think there's room to say that, I think what Stacey Abrams' concerns were in 2018 were valid. It may not have changed the result of the election, but her concerns actually carried over into 2020, 2022, and were, not really addressed in 2024 either.
Correct. Just like the problems with using touchscreen machines has only gotten worse. And, there were a lot of us who were quite surprised by Kamala Harris's loss, quite frankly. And I got scores of phone calls from people saying, are these results really right or not? Is this really right? Because so many of us really were surprised. And I spent, I don't know how many hundreds of hours analyzing data, not only from Georgia, but from other states as well, but primarily Georgia.
Right.
And here's the disappointing answer that I have.
All right.
You get to a certain place and you hit a wall and you can see all sorts of strange anomalies in numbers, but there's nowhere to go with them because we have, and quite frankly, Pennsylvania and North Carolina have similar obstruction problems. They're not stemming from the same place, but they close the doors. The ballots are literally counted behind closed doors, and the public is blocked from knowing and validating, are these the right numbers? And this is where we've lost our way, I think. And I think that maybe the Republicans have it a little more right than the Democrats do here.
Okay,
like
fair enough.
Whose elections are these anyway? Whose elections are these anyway? And Jimmy Carter would say, I believe, to us all, well, they're the people's elections. And the people need to be part of running the elections. And the people need to have full oversight. And there should be no corruption in the vote count. And the people and the press, not the government, should be able to verify and validate who they've elected. Because turning over elections to the government and just say, you tell us whether you guys got reelected, is going to end up. And that is where I think the Democratic-Republican divide is right now in Georgia. At least the Republican activists are saying, no, these are our elections. We want to see the ballots counted. We want to see them accounted for. We don't want any behind closed door stuff. And I fear that the Democrats haven't thought this through. And their position is, protect the government officials. They're all Mother Teresa. And just let the government run elections. Well, our founding fathers knew better than that. They went, no, no, no. These are the people's elections, and that's why we don't let the government control elections. But Georgia has been the worst state in the 50 states to let the government run elections.
That being said, our founding fathers didn't exactly have it right either, and it took more than 100 years for us to even tinker with what was a glaring problem, which was the privacy issue and giving folks the peace of mind of knowing that they could vote their conscience without blowback. And I want to touch on that.
Exactly.
I'm going to take a quick break. We're with the Executive Director of the Coalition for Good Governance, Marilyn Marks, when The Ron Show returns on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms. That would be at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. We're on Blue Sky. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but did I say Instagram? Yeah, anyway, at Ron Show ATL. Marilyn Marks, the Coalition for Good Governance Executive Director, joins us, and we can find the Coalition on most of those social media platforms as well. Have you guys made an imprint on Blue Sky as well?
We have, yes.
Good. I want to share a quick piece of audio from WXIA TV about 4 years ago with regard to election privacy. And you brought this to my attention last week, and it had never dawned on me before. And then this story surfaced, and I just think it brings some perspective that I'd never really considered before. Let me roll this audio.
Did you feel like you had privacy in the voting booth?
Well, I was a little leery about that.
Carol and Pat West voted in the Masonic Hall in the farming town of Pinehurst Tuesday. They saw poll workers politely avert their eyes when they cast their votes in the state Senate special election.
And, somebody behind you could actually see how you were voting. Not that it really mattered to me, but the privacy was not quite as much as before to me.
I've heard some people say that they felt like people in the room could see who they were voting for.
It's a good possibility that you could.
George Royal had a similar experience in the town of Lilly, where he's a city councilman and his wife Gloria is the city clerk. Voters in the special election used the state's newly purchased voting machines. Compared to the machines they're replacing, the new machines are larger. The HD screens are brighter, and they sit almost vertically on the tops of tables. And they are protected from prying eyes close by with blue plastic shields.
The old machines were kind of more horizontal. These are vertical. They're very brightly lit. They have big print. It makes it great for the voter to be able to see what they're doing, but it also makes it easy for everybody else in the room to see what's going on.
People could be intimidated, I would think.
Gloria Royal was among the people we talked with who said they don't care much whether their neighbors can see their ballot.
In our small community, we pretty much know, but in larger areas, I can see where that could be a problem.
Marilyn, it never dawned on me that when I go to vote on a touchscreen that's propped up vertically, that there are people that could see what I'm doing. I don't personally care. I mean, I'm on I'm on the air 5 days a week, pretty much telegraphing how I'm going to vote. But there are some folks that's an issue for.
There are a lot of folks that's an issue for. I think that those of us who live in metro areas are not sensitive enough to the vast majority of Georgians where it can be an issue. It would break your heart to go watch some of the voting that goes on in small rural communities, in small precinct polling places, where the poll workers feel like that they have the right to watch how people are voting, and to watch many times minorities, young people, go in and try their best to keep the peering eyes of these local authority figures away from the screen. I remember visiting at one small polling place in a rural community, and the poll workers were literally saying things. Of course, everybody knows everybody. To people walking in the door like, "Oh, hey, Sally, your daddy was in here a while ago to vote. He told me to make sure you voted right." It's just heartbreaking to watch people look over their shoulders, knowing that they are being watched. Both parties ought to be fighting this. But as we think about how red Georgia counties are in rural areas, the Democrats probably don't understand how many votes they are losing, how many people are intimidated because their landlord, their boss, their pastor, their controlling spouse is watching how they vote. We have fussed about this for years. It's a violation of federal law. It's a violation of state law. If we go back to Jimmy Carter's principles that he taught around the world, and that is, unless you have a secret ballot, a truly secret ballot where You can vote your conscience. It is not a free election. And you're right, our founding fathers didn't have that right. But in the 1890s, in the progressive era, that's when anonymous ballots came into play. But Georgia lost their way on that. I even know a couple of, more than a couple of Atlanta-based reporters, political type reporters, people who report on various news of politicians, who tell me how nervous they are. They go into the polling place at an odd time to try to find a private screen because they don't want, they're people who are known. They're seen on TV or in the, newspapers, and they do not want people knowing how they vote for obvious reasons.
Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take another quick break. So when we come back, I'm going to give Republicans a reason why they should be pushing for some more privacy, even in rural Georgia counties as well. We're with Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance. And we're talking about election security and election privacy here on The Ron Show and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
We're on with Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance. When we left, we were talking about election privacy, and it's something that never really dawned on me before you brought it up, and then I saw the WXIA TV piece that we shared. I'll have that link in the show notes at ronshowatl.com that talks about how there are folks who feel a little uneasy about voting. Even when you have like the plastic partitions that are sort of shielding from the person to your immediate left or immediate right anyway, how you're voting, but the person who is 50 feet behind you with that bright touchscreen and large font, which is meant to make it easier for folks who have, vision issues to vote. It's also easy for the polling worker who is sitting at the table behind you to kind of see how you're voting. And in small towns and small counties, I think about, remember the old show Petticoat Junction, where the guy that ran the general store was also the postmaster and all the other things? Do you want Mr. Ziffel to know everything about what's going on? I don't think it was Sam. It was Sam, wasn't it? Anyway, it's been a while since I've watched that show. But there are, I guess there are some legitimate concerns. And you brought up the rural bent and how Democrats should be talking about this because they're potentially losing votes. But I posit that it actually could also be Republicans who are losing voters because there was a lot of talk heading into the 2024 election about how perhaps conservatives are making inroads in the African-American community. And newsflash, there are black voters in rural Georgia. There are some rural Georgia counties that are majority black. And you spoke about the influence of husbands or bosses, pastors, for sure, because we all know souls to the polls is a big deal in the African-American community. And what if we were to tell Republicans, what if you were losing votes because of this lack of privacy?
I know some Republicans who did not vote because they didn't want to vote for Trump, but wanted to vote for other Republicans, but did not want their non-Trump vote to be seen. So they just said,
and that's
not going to vote.
Yeah, that's another question I was going to ask. You brought up something to me in conversation last week about being able to track voting. You mean to tell me that when I'm done voting, it's not just a bunch of numbers, but somebody can actually determine exactly how I voted?
Under many conditions. Now, the bigger the metro area that you are in, and if you are voting in an early voting location with lots of different people, it's a little harder. I would have to make a plan. If I really wanted to target you, in see how you voted, what I would do, because you're probably in a metro polling place, I would have a watcher there, check what time you're voting, and then go look at the there's a public counter that registered one up every time you put the ballot into the scanner. Go check what the scanner number was, and then it's completely easy to trace it back to you. Or if I'm sitting there as a poll watcher and I see that you're the 115th person that votes today, I can easily check. But in these rural counties, it gets to be much easier where they don't have such a busy polling place. And you can pretty much look at the roll of who voted any particular day, and see what precinct they were in. And, we've only got 2 ballots from that precinct. And because the ballots have traceable numbers on them, you have to do a little bit of work, but it's easy. I mean, we've got automated programs that unscramble the numbers, so we know exactly the order in which the ballots were cast. And people are shocked. At first, they say, "Oh, that sounds ridiculous. That sounds so hard to do. That sounds difficult." Then they start looking at how traceable the records are, and people almost panic when they see just how traceable these numbers are. Now, this is something that our expert Alex Halderman, who you've spoken about before in your shows, he and his grad students at the University of Michigan discovered that the numbers that Dominion assigned to the ballots were not random, but instead they were. It was easy to figure out the algorithm, so you can put them back in order. He sent Dominion notices about this in the summer of 2022. He informed Raffensperger and the state election board. We filed a complaint with the state election board in the fall of 2022, gave them solutions, and they said, we'll deal with it after the midterms. We'll have a non-secret ballot election for the midterms, and then we'll deal with it later. They've refused to deal with it since, as has Raffensperger. And so, yes, the ballots are traceable. No one talks about it. Are there people tracing? What do you think? These days, given data?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, though. Are there people actually doing this?
Well, why wouldn't you? I mean, when we think about ways that people are invading our privacy all the time with data, and given the nature of elections, if you put this data out there and it's virtually free and it can be used to win elections, intimidate people, surely it is being abused somewhere.
Well,
you just can't have this kind of data without it being abused.
Yeah, I could surmise where it's easier for a layperson to figure out. Oh, look, at this polling location, only 15 people voted, and I could hyper target. If I saw that 14 voted, for one candidate and one didn't, I can probably easily surmise who that one person was, or make life miserable for them, or try and whip the others in line. I could see where that would happen, but I'm also now thinking about all of those mass quantities of voter eligibility queries that came up, and I wonder if this is a tool for them as well.
Absolutely, because you can then go pretty well figure out how an individual voter voted. Therefore, who do I want to challenge? I want to challenge the people who vote for the other direction. Right? Leave my people alone.
Do you think
Do you
think that either party just sort of moves on after an election? Obviously, let me rephrase that, because the GOP did not move on after 2020. But do you think that in some cases, like right now, it's all kumbaya? They're happy. They got what they wanted. They got the result that they wanted, I should say. And so, while there are still some questions and maybe some murmurings, we saw on the front page of today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution that there are still some Republicans with an appetite for making some sort of changes, some of which you posit would be good. It almost seems like after elections, in normal cases, non-2020, that they just like, okay, well, let's just move on. And then in the 11th hour leading up to the next one, then there's all this kerfuffle about wanting to make tweaks.
Exactly right, and then they say, "Well, it's too late; it's too close to the election."
Well, but one of the suggestions that I saw in that Mark Neese article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was to sort of lock down the state's election board 90 days out. Like, you can't do that, or maybe even in an election year that you can't go making changes, because at the local level, people are being trained, and these are mostly volunteer roles. Poll watchers, et cetera, and so on. And so asking them to come in at the last minute to do more training for something that they're not being paid for, or being paid very poorly for, it is a tall task.
Sometimes, but they really overstated that. And this idea of, and you and I talked about it before, of accounting for all of the ballots before they are absolutely tabulated. That was a very logical idea that's done all over the country. And I don't care how close to the election it was. It needed to be done. They made way too big a wrong-headed deal about it. And we have been spending a lot of time looking at this so-called audit that was done of the Georgia election. And what does it prove? It proves over and over that there were wrong counts, that that ballot accounting was very much needed. And yes, and in fact, the Republicans were right about that, and the Democrats were wrong. And we saw John Ferver's statement today in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, basically saying that this election proved that they didn't need any changes.
See, they got what they wanted. They got what they wanted, so they're okay with it.
Right. But it proved just the opposite. When you look at the details of how that election was run, we cannot verify who won. We know that the audit was bogus. We know that the Secretary of State was completely dishonest in all of his claims about that audit. We know that numbers did not reconcile. We know that over 100,000 ballots were rescanned, and we can't find recounted. I don't mean counted twice, but there's no record of the initial tabulation, and it is beginning to look very unsettling. I am not saying we got the wrong outcome. I'm not saying that, but the process was terrible, and John Ferver is completely wrong in saying that this election proved that the rules are all okay.
And let's point out by the way that Ferver is a Governor Kemp appointee. He is a Republican, and what he's saying runs counter to the three we call them the MAGA board members that were put in place last year as well. So it's not exactly, again, this is not a binary conversation. It's not exactly as if like Team R disagrees with Team D. Sometimes those in Team R disagree with others in Team R as well.
Right. And I think that hopefully, I'm actually hoping that there's some division in the Democratic Party, because some of the things that Syra Draper was saying are just completely inaccurate. And she's kind of the person who, is the spokesperson on the Democratic side. And she's saying that the policies that are being promoted are coming out of made up fears as opposed to actual facts. No. Syra Draper has been one, unfortunately, who has not mastered the actual facts. She has not mastered the cybersecurity concerns, the secrecy concerns, and when she claims, like she did today, that these are problems that don't exist, she doesn't have her eyes open. And I'm hoping that the Democrats will have a more open view this coming year and look back at saying, wait a minute, whose elections are these anyway? We need to have transparent, verifiable outcomes, and full ballot secrecy, where I can't be sitting here tracing at my home, at my computer, tracing to see how people vote.
So
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to reintroduce you here. We're with Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance. Here's my question. Thank goodness you guys are here doing this. Where is the ACLU? Where is the League of Women Voters? Where are all these, privacy and voting rights organizations that are normally making the most noise about this sort of thing? Because, listen, it took me a little convincing. You were peppering me with text messages and links, and I mean, I'm on board. Let's address some of these problems. Again, not a binary problem, not something that a binary body politic can seemingly coalesce on. But I think that there are answers that both sides should be able to agree on. So, where are these where are these organizations I spoke of to help champion some of these changes as well?
That is one of the best questions that needs to be asked publicly again and again. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a bunch of longtime cybersecurity experts in voting systems, and they were bemoaning that very thing. They said the ACLU and Common Cause and so many voting rights organizations used to completely support what we were saying and say we absolutely must have verifiable elections where it is understood as a civil right to have an accountable ballot. And all of them disappeared in 2020. They ran the other direction in 2020. When Biden won and the MAGA started yelling about the voting system, unfortunately, all those voting rights organizations just started having a knee-jerk reaction that you can't criticize the voting system because it would mean that you were questioning Biden's victory.
Sure.
We talked yesterday, how do we pull them out of their caves to come back to where they were for years? And that is supporting an accountable vote and a secret ballot. We've got to figure out how to do that and remind them that just the right to vote and put a ballot in the ballot box isn't enough. It's not a real vote unless we know that it is counted properly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what the amount it costs to get an incremental voter to the ballot box is so much, and we're not spending anything on making sure that that person's vote was counted correctly.
Right.
You're right. This should be a bipartisan, multi-partisan effort supported by people who support privacy rights, who support the civil right to vote. We've got to go get them, and quite frankly, it is work that is beginning right now by experts, known experts in the voting system world, to try to go pull those guys out of their caves.
We are on with Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance. More of this conversation on election integrity and election security. I know it's a 2024 conversation, but it's actually a conversation about now and the future. When The Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final few moments of The Ron Show today with Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance, talking about election security, election integrity, election privacy as well. Is it possible that because this doesn't fit a binary situation that we're crossing boundaries here when it comes to, yes, this is a good idea, yes, that's a good idea, that maybe we could find some common ground and say, well, you know what, maybe we should make this all nonpartisan in some sort of, the state election board, a nonpartisan commission instead of, and I don't know how possible it is to do that at the county level, but I mean, I know that, we go and vote for municipal elections in most cities and towns, and they're nonpartisan. So why can't we make the entire process overseen by something that's nonpartisan? And in 2025, I got to get used to that. We should be able to log on and watch as votes are being tabulated in real time. I mean, people boringly watch C-SPAN and see what's happening in our legislative chambers. Why couldn't we have something of a C-SPAN, or even if it's just online and via YouTube for perpetuity to see after the fact, the actual videoing of the counting and tabulating of votes from the local to the state and then to the federal?
We should, but even more importantly, because we'll never see the inner workings of the scanners from a C-SPAN camera, from a camera, what we need to be able to do is look at the ballots afterwards and test to make sure that they were tabulated. That is the most important part. Is let's have the cameras for chain of custody controls, make sure that the ballots don't disappear. But then we need to be looking at those pieces of paper and testing the tallies. But let's go back to your point about bipartisan commissions. I want to disagree with you on that.
Okay.
And that is, I think it is impossible to find, 5 people, and certainly not 5 people in every county that are kind of Mother Teresa. You just don't get Mother Teresa interested in elections.
You sound like me when I say you're not going to get a jury of 12 to convict Luigi Mangione at this point. You do.
Right.
It's not possible?
Okay.
You think that's not possible?
But not possible. How are you going to identify Mother Teresa? But here's the way you get neutrality. Aren't you looking for neutrality? The way you get neutrality on an election board is to have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. Okay. Don't hide their partisanship. Don't hide where they're really coming from. Just like on city councils, we know they may be, quote, nonpartisan, but we know who's the Republican. We know who's the Democrat on these city councils, right? Let's don't pretend. Let's don't try to hide it. But let competition beat competition. Let there be. And you've got to find out you got to have a way to to cast a tiebreaker vote, have a chairman that's maybe elected by the rest of the people on the board, who that they can agree, if, is an independent or fair-minded or whatever.
I don't,
decide on who their chair is.
I don't trust independents anymore. I
Okay,
really don't,
all right.
because I feel like people hear the word independent and they think somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
Independents can be very progressive. Independents can be very conservative because they don't feel like the party that you think they would be aligned with goes far enough.
That is correct. I guess what I'm saying is let's find a different way to choose that chairman, even if in the best way to do it, I think, is to let let's call it 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, or 2 and 2, go together, find the person that they trust to be their tiebreaker, etc. But my point is, don't go try to find people that appear to be neutral for all those seats. Go get highly partisan people, and then have your debates in public, and you will end up with a much better result when they have to work together and their partisan stripes are clear and transparent.
Or what if we did that, and then we're so insistent on spreading democracy across the globe, even though we don't do it here. What if we sought some international assistance on situations like that, where we just had somebody who was assigned by the UN or the Carter Center or some actual nonpartisan organization that helps oversee election integrity across the globe, actually participates in some manner here in the United States?
Well, I think that should be encouraged, but it's awfully hard to get to put them into official positions.
Sure.
And, the other thing is that I'm at least a great believer in that the people need to oversee and run their elections at the most grassroots level. The elections belong to the people, not to an international organization, not to the federal government, not to the state government. But, the closer to home we get it, the more accountability we have. And I think that one of the things that we forget is that while you and I think about who gets, who wins a race for U.S. Senate or president, the local elections are where that is what is so important to people day to day.
Yeah.
Who's the sheriff in the local, particularly these small counties?
Yeah.
Who's the sheriff? Who's the tax commissioner? Who's the county commissioner in charge of zoning? I mean, that's where those local school board, local elections.
And listen, that is where Democrats, unfortunately, have their eye off the ball and have for so long. Cobb County is a solidly blue county, and yet right now it's currently split 2-2 on the commission, and the school board is run by conservatives. And look what they're doing up there. I say that, but we also don't see the same turnout numbers in an off cycle for those local races either. So while they may be the most important to the voter, they don't seem to be of the highest priority to the voter.
Right, and the voters often just are not aware of them. Although
that's true.
Our county commissioners are generally in the same cycle as presidential and congressional, but not always. You're right about that. But they also, while they have so much control over the day-to-day lives, whether it's how to run the library or the schools or the fire department, those are also, going back to security of the election, those are the elections the most easily stolen.
Yeah.
Because particularly with the software now out in everybody and anyone's hands, you and I've spent time before on previous broadcasts about how the software was stolen in Georgia.
Yep.
It has been distributed widely on the internet.
Yep.
It is very easy to hack the Georgia system.
Yeah.
People think about, it's really hard to hack a presidential election. Well, maybe not. However, nobody can argue. It's damned easy to hack a small county sheriff election.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's where you've got real money. That's you can get a college student who's got the skill set to hack. Yeah. And so we cannot forget that we must have verifiable elections at a county level too.
Well, thank goodness the Coalition for Good Governance is here to keep pushing this when all these other organizations I'm looking for aren't doing so. Marilyn Marks, Executive Director for the Coalition for Good Governance, thank you so much for the good fight, the good efforts, and for joining me today to have this discussion on The Ron Show. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always fun. I look forward to talking soon.
And thank you for listening in on this conversation. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. Find us weekdays, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices, or wherever you podcast. Take care.